The Tao tell you they bring unity and enlightenment. Their technology gleams, their words inspire hope. But beneath their pristine armor and noble speeches lies a truth more terrible than any imperial nightmare. The greater good isn't a philosophy, it's a prison you never knew existed. I once believed in perfection, in the immaculate geometry of purpose, in the clean lines of a society without contradiction or doubt. I remember standing on the viewing deck of our expedition vessel as we broke orbit above the contested world of Corvessa, watching the gleaming white hulls of our fleet catch the light of an alien sun, the Fifth Sphere Expansion, a name that tasted like destiny on my tongue. My name is Shazui Tevar, of the Fire Caste, veteran of 3 campaigns and bearer of the honor markings of Viola. I have killed in the name of the greater good. I have burned worlds to perfect them. I have offered salvation with one hand and extinction with the other, and I have believed, with every pulse of blood through my body, that our path was righteous and necessary, until I saw what perfection truly costs. The transport shook violently as we entered atmosphere, the void shields flaring blue against the friction of re-entry. Around me, my fire team performed final equipment checks with practiced efficiency, each movement precise, each gesture economical. We were the product of 1,000 generations of selective breeding, our bodies and minds crafted for singular purpose. I was proud of this, proud to be shaped by something greater than myself. Corvessa was a human mining world, ugly and inefficient like all their constructions, a cancerous growth of industry and faith that had spread across the northern continent. Atmospheric processors belched columns of unfiltered smoke into the pearl-gray sky. Hab blocks rose like broken teeth from the scarred earth, a perfect candidate for enlightenment. We made planetfall on the outskirts of the primary settlement, a sprawling, industrial complex designated Extraction Point Alpha by command. The Watercast representatives had already made contact with the planetary governor, offering the standard terms of submission, the empty promises of autonomy within the Empire, a courtesy we extended before the inevitable. Like warning prey before the hunt begins, I remember the smell when the drop ramp lowered, acrid chemical runoff and the stink of unwashed humans. The drone scouts had already mapped the area, highlighting defensive emplacements and population centers. My superior, Chassel Kais, assigned sectors with quick hand signals. My team drew the residential district, a warren of prefabricated housing units arranged in concentric circles around a central market square. Our orders were simple: minimal casualties, maximum compliance. The humans were not soldiers, they were miners, technicians, ordinary laborers caught in the expansion of powers beyond their comprehension. When we moved through their streets in our battlesuits, they watched from darkened windows with wide, terrified eyes. Some fled, some knelt, some spat curses in their crude tongue. I felt nothing but pity for them. How could they understand what was happening? To them we were invaders, conquerors, Xenos. They could not comprehend that we brought harmony, unity, purpose, that we offered them a place within something magnificent. We established a forward command post in what appeared to be a municipal building, the human symbols and icons already being removed and replaced with the circular emblem of the Empire. Ethereal Aunel Taun Kas had accompanied our expedition personally, a rare honor that spoke to the importance command placed on this world. I had never stood in the presence of an ethereal before. I had glimpsed them from a distance during ceremonial functions, felt the ripple of reverence that moved through crowds when they appeared. But to be in the same room, to breathe the same air, this was different. The Ethereal entered the command center with a small retinue of Watercast diplomats and Firecast guards. Everything about him radiated serenity. His movements were fluid, unhurried. His eyes, larger than those of the Firecast, seemed to contain depths of compassion and wisdom that made my chest ache with sudden yearning. When he spoke, his voice was melodic, soothing. The agitation and tension of combat preparations melted away. My mind cleared of all distractions, all doubts. I felt connected to something vast and perfect, a sensation of rightness that eclipsed any individual concern. He addressed us briefly, commending our efficiency, emphasizing the importance of minimizing violence while achieving compliance. Every word he spoke seemed charged with profound truth. I remember thinking I would gladly die at that moment if he asked it of me, not from fear or obligation, but from love, pure, uncomplicated love for the embodiment of everything I believed in. It was only later, alone, in my quarters, that I wondered at the intensity of my reaction. I had been trained to revere the ethereals, of course. Every caste was. They were our guides, our philosophers, the architects of the greater good. But this had been something more, something that bypassed thought entirely and reached directly into my most primal instincts. I dismissed the thought as fatigue, as the natural awe any Tao would feel in such a presence. I should have recognized it as the first crack in the foundation of everything I believed. The compliance operation proceeded with textbook precision over the following days. The planetary governor, faced with overwhelming technological superiority and the promise of integration rather than extermination, surrendered the primary continent with minimal resistance. Some human elements retreated to the southern highlands, a mixture of military units and civilian refugees, but they posed no significant threat. My team was assigned to secure a data repository, a squat, armored building filled with humming cogitator banks and flickering hololithic displays. The humans had abandoned it so quickly they left their meals half-eaten on workstations, cups of some stimulant liquid now cold and congealed. We were accompanied by a unit of Earth caste technicians, led by an older Tau named Fiovra Borkanovarti. While my team secured the perimeter, the technicians moved through the facility, interfacing their equipment with human technology, extracting whatever information Command deemed valuable. Ovarti was unlike any Earth caste I had met before. Most were soft-spoken, focused entirely on their specialized tasks, rarely engaging with fire warriors except to discuss equipment modifications. But Ovarti sought me out during a quiet moment, his eyes bright with an intensity that seemed at odds with his caste designation. "This is the third Imperial world I have processed," he said without preamble, his voice low though we stood apart from others. "The pattern of data is always the same: religious texts, administrative records, industrial production logs. But there are always gaps, shasui, deliberate omissions." I did not understand why he was sharing this observation with me, a fire warrior with no clearance or need for data analysis. "The humans likely purged sensitive information before retreating," I suggested, eager to return to my patrol route. Ovarti made a sharp gesture of negation. "Not purged, classified, hidden in plain sight within their religious texts. The humans encode military and scientific data within their most sacred writings. It is ingenious. Their priests and their warriors are one system, faith and force, intertwined." "Report your findings to Command," I said, uncomfortable with the conversation. "If there is tactical value, they will extract it." "I have reported," he said, his voice dropping further. "3 times now, my analyses are acknowledged, then buried. The water caste censors my findings before they reach Command. Why would they do this, Shazui? Why would they hide the true nature of our enemy from our own military?" A pulse of alarm moved through me, followed immediately by calm. A profound, overwhelming calm that smoothed away the jagged edges of concern. Of course, Command knew what they were doing. The water caste understood how to manage information for the greater good. Individual curiosity must be subordinated to collective harmony. "Your questions border on insubordination, Fiovra," I said, surprised by the hardness in my own voice. "Return to your duties." He flinched as if struck, then lowered his eyes. "Of course, Shazui," I spoke out of turn. "For the greater good." "For the greater good," I echoed, the words falling from my lips with automatic precision. I reported the conversation to my superior, as protocol dictated. Any sign of disharmony or questioning of Command was to be documented and addressed immediately. Shas el-Kais thanked me for my vigilance and assured me the matter would be handled appropriately. I never saw Fiovra Ovarti again. At the time, I assumed he had been reassigned. I did not question further. The first week of occupation passed without significant incident. Human resistance was scattered and ineffective, primarily consisting of sabotaged equipment and crude explosive devices that our sensors detected long before they posed any threat. I led patrols through the residential sectors, enforcing curfews and identifying humans with specialized skills that might be useful to the Empire. It was during one such patrol that I encountered the human child. She appeared suddenly from between two habitation units, a small figure dressed in filthy coveralls several sizes too large. Her face was streaked with grime, her hair matted and uneven. She could not have been more than 7 or 8 cycles old by human standards. My team raised weapons instinctively, target locks blinking on displays. I signaled them to hold, stepping forward alone. The child did not flee. She stood her ground, staring up at my battlesuit with an expression I could not interpret. Not fear, exactly. Something harder. Something older than her years. "Where are your caretakers?" I asked, my suit speakers translating my words into crude Gothic. She did not respond. Instead, she reached into a pocket and withdrew something, holding it out to me. A small object that caught the dim light. I magnified my visual feed. A crude Aquila pendant, the symbol of human devotion to their corpse emperor, cast in some inexpensive metal, worn smooth with handling. "Take," she said, the first human word I had heard spoken directly to me since planetfall. "Emperor protects." I should have confiscated it immediately. Religious icons were contraband under occupation protocols, to be collected and destroyed to facilitate cultural re-education. But something in her eyes, in the solemnity of the gesture, made me hesitate. "Keep your trinket," I said. "Return to your dwelling. Curfew is in effect." She continued to hold the pendant toward me, her arm unwavering. "For you. You need..." One of my team shifted position, growing impatient. "Shazui, we should detain and process her, locate her adult relations." Before I could respond, the child darted forward with surprising speed. She pressed the pendant against the armored leg of my battlesuit, then turned and ran, disappearing between the habitat units. I should have pursued her, should have reported the encounter. Instead, I reached down and picked up the pendant where it had fallen after touching my armor. I stared at it, this worthless piece of human superstition, and felt something unexpected. Curiosity. What would drive a child to offer protection to an invader? What kind of belief survived conquest and occupation? I kept the pendant, secreting it in a compartment of my battlesuit. The first direct violation of protocol in my entire service record. I told myself it was a tactical decision, that understanding enemy psychology was valuable intelligence. But even then, I knew it was something else, a hairline fracture in the perfect unity of purpose that had defined my existence. That night, in the solitude of my assigned quarters, I examined the pendant more closely. The Aquila was crudely stamped, the wings asymmetrical, the details worn away by constant handling. On the reverse was an inscription, barely legible. "Faith shields the soul when armor fails." I found myself turning it over repeatedly in my fingers, the alien metal warming against my skin. My training had taught me to dismiss human religion as primitive superstition, a control mechanism used by their elites to maintain power over the masses. But this small object had been given freely, offered as genuine protection from one being to another. It suggested a worldview I had never considered, where connection might exist outside the structured hierarchies of caste and command. I put the pendant away, troubled by thoughts that seemed to come from outside myself. I needed clarity, focus, recommitment to my purpose. I decided to attend the evening address by the ethereal, something I had not done since our initial landing. The central plaza had been converted into an assembly area, with the symbols of the Empire prominently displayed. Tau from all castes gathered as dusk fell, forming orderly sections according to function and rank. I stood with other fire warriors, our armor gleaming in the artificial lighting that had been established throughout the settlement. Ethereal Aunel Town Cass ascended to the speaking platform with that same fluid grace I had noticed before. As he surveyed the assembled Tau, I felt a wave of calm spread through me, washing away the disquiet of my earlier thoughts. His presence alone was like a balm, realigning my perspective, restoring harmony to my mind. He spoke of progress, of the integration of this world into the Empire, of the greater good that would elevate all species to their highest potential. His words flowed like water, cool and clear, filling every empty space within me. I found myself nodding, smiling, feeling once again the pure certainty that had always guided me. When he spoke of the humans, he used terms like younger race and limited perspective. His tone compassionate, even affectionate, like an adult discussing children. They would learn, he assured us. They would come to understand the superiority of our way, the inevitability of our philosophy. Those who could not adapt would be given appropriate roles, their strengths harnessed, their weaknesses accommodated. It was perfect. It was beautiful. It was everything I had dedicated my life to achieving. So why did a small voice persist, somewhere in the depths of my mind, asking questions I had never before considered? Why did the image of the human child offering her pendant remain when all other doubts had been washed away? And why, when I looked at my fellow Tau, did I see only blank contentment on every face, as if we were not individual beings but cells in a single organism, moving with one purpose, one mind, one will? The address concluded with the traditional affirmation of the greater good, thousands of voices speaking as one, including mine. The words fell from my lips with practiced ease, but for the first time, I heard them as if from a distance, as if someone else were speaking through me. I returned to my quarters disturbed, not by what the ethereal had said, but by my reaction to it. The peace I had felt in his presence had been real, overwhelming, absolute, but it had also been artificial, as if imposed from outside rather than arising from genuine understanding or conviction. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of an alien world, turning over thoughts that seemed increasingly dangerous. I remembered the Earthcast technician, Ovati, his urgent questions, his subsequent disappearance. I thought of the human child, her solemn offering. I recalled the absolute loyalty I had felt in the ethereal's presence, and how quickly it had begun to fade once he was no longer before me. Something was wrong. Not with the greater good, not with the Empire, but with me. I was experiencing doubt. A condition I had been taught was a form of illness, a malfunction of proper Tau thinking that required immediate correction. I should report to the medical facility, request evaluation, receive whatever treatment would restore my harmony with the collective will. Instead, I reached for the pendant, hidden beneath my sleeping mat. I held it in my closed fist, feeling its edges press into my palm. Faith shields the soul when armor fails. What was my armor, my battle suit, my training, my absolute certainty in the rightness of the greater good? All of them were failing now, cracking like ice beneath a weight they were never designed to bear. The following morning brought new orders. The human resistance in the southern highlands had grown more coordinated, launching hit-and-run attacks against our supply lines. My team was assigned to a punitive expedition, tasked with locating and eliminating the command structure of the insurgency. We deployed at dawn, a mixed force of battlesuit teams and armored transports. I welcomed the clarity of combat operations after the confusion of the previous night. In battle, purpose was simple: survive, complete the mission, protect your team. The philosophical questions that had troubled me seemed distant and irrelevant in the face of immediate tactical concerns. The highlands were rugged, heavily forested, with deep ravines and sudden mist banks that interfered with our senses. The humans had chosen their refuge well, using the natural terrain to maximum advantage. Our advance was slow, methodical, with drone scouts moving ahead of the main force to identify threats and enemy positions. It was near midday when encountered the first signs of organized resistance. Crude but effective traps had been laid along our projected route, pressure plates connected to buried explosive devices. Our sensors detected most of them, but one transport at the rear of our column triggered a mine, losing a propulsion track and immobilizing it temporarily. As our technicians worked to repair the damage, I used the opportunity to survey our surroundings more carefully. Something about the pattern of traps troubled me. They seemed designed not to inflict maximum damage, but to channel our advance in a specific direction toward what appeared to be more open, favorable terrain. Chazelle. I voxed to my commander. I believe these emplacements are directive rather than destructive. They may be guiding us into an ambush position. There was a pause before Kais responded, his voice cold. Your concern is noted, Shazui. However, Command has provided our route based on comprehensive strategic analysis. We will proceed, as directed. I wanted to protest, to insist that the tactical situation had changed, that direct observation should override predetermined planning. But discipline held my tongue. I had already drawn attention through my report about Ovarti. Further dissent would mark me as problematic, potentially compromised. We continued along the designated route, moving into a broad valley between steep forested slopes. Perfect ambush terrain, every instinct warned me, too exposed, too predictable. But orders were orders, and I advanced with my team, sensors at maximum gain, weapon systems charged and ready. The attack, when it came, was not from the humans. A water-caste emissary had accompanied our expedition, a slender, soft-spoken Tau named Porodalith Mayan. He traveled in the command vehicle with Shassel Kais, presumably to handle any diplomatic opportunities that might arise from our mission. I had paid him little attention, as water-caste affairs rarely intersected with front-line combat operations. As we reached the center of the valley, Mien requested a halt to the column, citing the need to establish a communication relay with command. It was an unusual request in the middle of hostile territory, but Kais approved it without question. The column stopped, maintaining defensive positions while communication equipment was deployed. I noticed Mayan approach Kais, speaking urgently, gesturing toward the forested ridges around us. I could not hear their conversation, but Kais's posture changed, becoming more alert, more focused. He immediately issued new orders through the command network. All units, priority targets identified, human leadership elements located in Sector 7, Northeastern Ridge. Concentrate firepower on designated coordinates. Tactical displays updated with targeting information. I hesitated, studying the data. The designated area showed no heat signatures, no movement, no signs of human presence at all. Either their technology had suddenly advanced to include perfect stealth capabilities, or we were firing at shadows. Chazelle, request confirmation of target data, I voxed. My sensors show no enemy presence at the designated coordinates. Execute your orders, Shazui, came the immediate reply. Fire at will. Around me, other battlesuit teams were already aligning weapon systems, preparing to unleash a barrage on the empty forest. I stood motionless, gripped by a paralysis of conflicting imperatives. Duty demanded obedience. Training demanded verification before expending resources. Something deeper, something I could not name, demanded I understand what was happening. I switched my Vox to a private channel with my fire team. Hold fire, I ordered. Maintain position and combat readiness, but do not engage designated targets without visual confirmation. The acknowledgement lights from my team members blinked green on my display. They trusted me, followed my lead without question, as I had always followed my lead, superiors. What I was doing constituted insubordination, possibly even mutiny in a combat zone. Yet I could not bring myself to fire on a target that did not exist. The rest of the expedition had no such reservations. Pulse fire, missile salvos, and plasma discharges erupted from dozens of positions, all focusing on the forested ridge. The bombardment was overwhelming, turning trees to splinters, shattering rock, sending plumes of smoke and debris into the clear sky. If there had been humans there, they were now atomized, erased from existence. As the barrage continued, I scanned the opposite ridge, the area opposite our concentrated fire. A flicker of movement caught my attention. I magnified my visual feed, adjusting for the smoke and dust now filling the valley. Humans. Not on the ridge we were destroying, but on the overlooked opposite slope. Not a disorganized resistance group, but uniformed soldiers moving with discipline and purpose. They carried heavy weapons, deploying them with practiced efficiency, establishing firing positions with clear lines of sight to our column. Chassel, enemy forces confirmed on the western ridge. I reported urgently, heavy weapons being deployed, requesting permission to engage actual targets. No response. The command channel remained silent as our forces continued to pulverize the empty eastern slope. I watched in stunned disbelief as the humans completed their preparations unopposed, their weapons now trained on our exposed position. I had seconds to make a decision that would irrevocably alter my fate: follow orders and watch my fellow Tau be massacred due to an inexplicable tactical error, or act independently, potentially saving lives but branding myself a renegade. All units in Fire Team Kao Ui. I broadcast to my squad, new targets designated, Western Ridge, coordinates following. Engage immediately. My display showed the hesitation of my team members, their status indicators flickering between compliance and confusion. Then, one by one, they aligned to my targeting data, redirecting their fire toward the actual threat. Pulse fire lanced from our position, striking the human emplacements just as they prepared to open fire. The surprise was total, our coordinated volley eliminating their heavy weapon teams in the first seconds of engagement. The remaining humans scattered, seeking cover, returning sporadic and ineffective fire. All expedition units. I broadcast on the general channel, abandoning protocol entirely now. Priority targets on Western Ridge, multiple heavy weapon emplacements. Eastern Ridge clear, no enemy presence confirmed. Redirect fire immediately. The response was not what I expected. Instead of a tactical adjustment, a security team from within our own forces began moving toward my position, their weapons powered but not yet aimed at me. Chazel Kais's voice cut through the battle noise, cold and precise. Shazui Tivar, you are relieved of command. Power down your battlesuit and prepare for extraction. Security team, escort the Shazui back to base camp for evaluation. I could not comprehend what was happening. My team had just prevented a potential massacre, had identified and engaged the actual threat, while the rest of our forces expended ammunition on an empty hillside. Yet I was being treated as if I had committed some grievous violation. The security team surrounded my position, 4 battlesuits with weapons now openly trained on me. My own team held position, uncertain, caught between obeying their immediate superior and the expedition commander. Stand down, I told them through our private channel. Continue engaging enemy forces. Protect the column. They hesitated, then complied, turning their attention back to the human positions while the security team closed in around me. I powered down my weapon systems but kept my suit operational, unwilling to make myself completely vulnerable until I understood what was happening. As I was escorted away from the front line, the remainder of our forces finally redirected their fire to the actual human positions, belatedly acknowledging the threat I had identified. The battle was brief and one-sided once our full firepower was properly applied. The humans had lost the advantage of surprise, and our technology vastly outmatched their capabilities. I was returned to the forward base under guard, my battlesuit external controls locked, relegated to the status of a prisoner rather than a veteran warrior. The compound had changed in the days since our punitive expedition had departed. Additional security measures had been implemented, with Watercast officials now visibly present at all command functions. There was a tension in the air, a wariness among the fire warriors I observed during my escorted march to the detention facility. I was ordered to exit my battlesuit, which was then taken for technical evaluation, without my armor, dressed only in the body glove. Undergarment, I felt naked, vulnerable. I was led to a small, windowless room with a single metal bench, a surveillance drone hovering silently in one corner. The door sealed behind me with a pneumatic hiss. I sat alone for what seemed like hours, reviewing the events that had brought me to this point. The child with her pendant, the Earth-cast technician's questions, the inexplicable order to fire on an empty ridge while ignoring the actual threat. None of it aligned with the principles of the greater good as I understood them. Efficiency, harmony, collective survival. These were the core tenets of our society. Yet what I had witnessed seemed inefficient, disharmonious, potentially disastrous for collective survival. When the door finally opened, I expected to face Shaz el-Kais, or perhaps a security officer. Instead, the watercast emissary, Poro Mien, entered alone. He studied me with an expression I could not interpret, then gestured for the surveillance drone to power down. It descended to the floor, optical sensors dimming. "You have created quite a problem, Shazui Tavar," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "A fire warrior who thinks for himself, who questions orders, who sees what he is not meant to see." "I saw humans preparing to attack our position," I replied, keeping my own voice level. "I engaged a verified threat while the expedition wasted resources on an empty hillside. My actions protected our forces." Mayan made a gesture of acknowledgement. "Indeed, you acted with tactical logic, even courage, and therein lies the problem." He moved closer, studying me as if I were a specimen under examination. "Tell me, have you experienced unusual thoughts recently? Doubts about command decisions, questions about the nature of our society?" I hesitated. This was clearly not a simple disciplinary meeting. My answer could determine my fate. "I have performed my duties as required," I said carefully. "If my recent actions appeared insubordinate, I accept whatever correction is deemed appropriate." A smile flickered across Mayan's face, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. A diplomatic response. "Perhaps you have water-cast elements in your ancestry." He circled me slowly, still speaking in that same gentle tone. "But you have not answered my question. Have you experienced doubt?" I thought of the pendant, hidden in my quarters, of the strange disconnection I had felt during the ethereal's address, of the questions that had begun to form in my mind, unbidden and unwelcome. "All Tau experience moments of uncertainty," I said. "That is why we have the castes, the chain of command, the guidance of the ethereals, to provide clarity when individuals falter." A textbook answer. Mayan stopped directly before me, but not truthful, not complete. He reached into a pocket of his robes and withdrew a small object. The Aquila pendant. My breath caught involuntarily. "This was found among your possessions. A human religious symbol, contraband, seditious material. Can you explain its presence?" There was no point in denial or evasion. The evidence was literally in his hand. A human child gave it to me during a patrol. I kept it to better understand enemy psychology. Without reporting it, without surrendering it for analysis, you kept it secret, private. A small rebellion, perhaps. A crack in the perfect unity of your devotion to the greater good. Mayan turned the pendant over in his fingers, just as I had done. "Do you know what this means to them? This corpse symbol?" I shook my head. "Hope," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Hope that transcends death. Hope that defies logic, evidence, even reality itself. The humans believe their emperor watches over them even after death, that his broken, decaying form somehow protects them across the vastness of space and time." He closed his fist around the pendant. Absurd, of course, primitive superstition, yet powerful enough that a child would offer it to an invader, believing it might shield even a Xenos soul. I did not know how to respond. The conversation had taken a direction I could not have anticipated. My seemed almost contemplative rather than accusatory. "You are experiencing neural degradation, Shazuitavar," he said abruptly, his tone shifting to clinical detachment. "A rare but documented condition affecting certain Firecast members after prolonged combat exposure. It manifests as increased independence of thought, questioning of established hierarchies, and diminished response to ethereal influence. Fortunately, it is treatable." Neural degradation? I had never heard of such a condition. Yet it would explain the changes I had been experiencing, the growing disconnect between my thoughts and the collective will of the Empire. "What is the treatment?" I asked, a cold dread beginning to form in my gut. "Genetic resequencing, neural pathway reinforcement. Nothing to concern yourself with." Mayan moved toward the door. "You will be transported to a specialized medical facility. After treatment, you will return to service with a clean record. This aberration will be forgotten." Something in his phrasing, in the careful neutrality of his expression, triggered a warning deep in my soldier's instincts. This was not a medical referral. This was something else, something he was not fully disclosing. And if I refused treatment? The question escaped before I could consider its implications. Mayan paused, his back to me. Refuse? Why would any loyal Tau refuse necessary medical care? Unless... He turned slowly. Unless the degradation is more advanced than initial assessment indicates. I remained silent, suddenly aware that I stood at a crossroads I had not seen approaching. Every word, every gesture now, would determine a path I might not be able to leave. "Rest, Shazui," Mayan said, his voice once again gentle, almost compassionate. "Medical transport arrives tomorrow. You will be well cared for." After he left, the surveillance drone reactivated, its optical sensor fixed unblinkingly upon me. I lay on the hard bench, staring at the featureless ceiling, turning over Mayan's words in my mind. Neural degradation. A medical condition that conveniently explained away independent thought. A treatment that would restore my harmony with the collective will. It sounded reasonable, beneficial even. Yet every instinct warned me that whatever awaited me at this specialized medical facility was not healing but something far darker. I thought of Ovati, the Earth-caste technician who had questioned too deeply and disappeared. I thought of the inexplicable order to fire on an empty ridge, and how quickly I had been removed when I identified the actual threat. I thought of the absolute calm I felt in the ethereal's presence, how it washed away all doubt, all question, all individual thought. What if that was not inspiration or spiritual connection? What if it was something more tangible, more biological? A biochemical influence, perhaps. A pheromone control mechanism that bypassed conscious thought and acted directly on the nervous system. The idea was heretical, unthinkable. Yet once formed, it could not be dismissed. It would explain so much. The unquestioning obedience of all castes to the ethereals. The immediate harmony of conquered species who were exposed to ethereal presence. The rare neural degradation in individuals who somehow developed resistance to this influence. If true, then everything I believed about our society was a lie. The greater good was not a philosophical choice but a form of enslavement. Our vaunted unity, not the product of superior culture but of biological control. I could not sleep. My mind raced through possibilities, implications, options. By morning, I had reached a decision. I could not submit to whatever treatment awaited me. I needed to escape, to find evidence, to understand what was happening not just to me but to my entire species. The opportunity came during the morning meal cycle. A single guard delivered a food tray, momentarily deactivating the door seal. He was careless, distracted, perhaps assuming that a fellow Tau, even one under investigation, posed no real threat. I had been trained in unarmed combat, my reflexes honed by years of battlesuit operation. He never saw the strike coming. I secured his sidearm and communication device, then moved quickly through the detention facility. It was lightly staffed, Most security resources focused on controlling the human population rather than managing internal threats. I encountered only 2 more guards before reaching an exterior access point, and both fell to precisely applied stun settings before they could raise an alarm. Outside, dawn was breaking over the captured human settlement. I kept to shadows, service corridors, maintenance tunnels, avoiding the main thoroughfares where patrols would be heaviest. My goal was the command center, specifically the secure data repository where Ovarti had been working. If there was evidence of what I suspected, it would be there, carefully hidden in classified files but not completely erased. The command center's exterior security was formidable, designed to repel human insurgents rather than contain Tau fugitives. But its internal systems operated on recognition protocols that still acknowledged my genetic signature and rank. The secondary entrance scanner admitted me with a soft chime, identifying me as authorized personnel despite my current status. I moved quickly through deserted corridors, aware that alarm would spread soon as my escape was discovered. The data repository was located in the building's core, a climate-controlled chamber filled with humming servers and holographic interfaces. I sealed the door behind me, using the guard's security codes to override the normal access protocols. Now came the difficult part. I was no Earthcast technician, my knowledge of data systems basic and practical rather than specialized. But I knew enough to access the main query interface to input search parameters: neural degradation, ethereal pheromones, biological control, genetic resistance. The system processed my queries, searching through terabytes of data collected from this world and transmitted from the Empire. Most results were restricted, requiring clearance levels far above my rank, but not all. Some files were merely classified, accessible to any command-level operative with the right approach. I began to find fragments, pieces of a puzzle scattered across multiple data sources, medical research on Tau neurophysiology, specifically the regions of the brain that processed social cues and hierarchical relationships. Genetic sequencing data showing subtle variations between castes, particularly in olfactory receptor genes. Behavioral studies conducted on population groups before and after ethereal contact. None of it was explicitly damning, none of it stated outright what I suspected. But together, the fragments formed a pattern too precise to be coincidence. The Tau species had been engineered, our genetics modified over generations to respond to specific biochemical signals produced only by the ethereal caste. We were designed for compliance, for unity, for submission to a greater will that was not philosophical but pharmacological. I was so absorbed in my discovery that I almost missed the change in the building's ambient sounds. The subtle shift in air circulation patterns, the distant sound of booted feet moving with purpose rather than routine. They had found me. The time for research was over. Now it was about survival. I downloaded what data I could to a portable device, then accessed the building schematics, looking for an exit route that would avoid the approaching security forces. A maintenance shaft connected the server room to an external cooling system, designed to allow technicians access without disrupting operations. It would be tight, but navigable. I had just removed the access panel when the repository door reverberated with a heavy impact. Security override in progress. Seconds, not minutes, before they breached the seal. I slipped into the narrow shaft, pulling the panel closed behind me, and began to crawl through the darkness, guided only by the faint emergency lighting strips along the floor. The shaft terminated at an external housing for climate control equipment, a large structure adjacent to the command center but outside its immediate security perimeter. I emerged into morning light, momentarily blinded after the darkness of the shaft. Distant alarms were now sounding throughout the settlement. My escape had been officially acknowledged. All forces would be on alert. I needed to get off-world. An impossible task for a lone fugitive, especially one without allies or resources. But I had one advantage: intimate knowledge of Firecast protocols, the predictable patterns of search and containment that would now be implemented. They would expect me to flee outward, toward the wilderness beyond the settlement perimeter, following the logical path of any escaping prisoner. Instead, I moved deeper into the occupied zone, toward the spaceport where our vessels maintained regular supply runs to the orbiting fleet. If I could access a cargo shuttle, perhaps even stow aboard a larger transport, I might escape the immediate hunt. After that, the future was uncertain, a blank space in my tactical planning. The spaceport was a hive of activity, Earthcast workers loading supplies, Firecast security checking manifests and patrolling access points. I observed from concealment, looking for patterns, vulnerabilities, opportunities. A cargo lifter operated by a single Earthcast worker caught my attention. It was ferrying containers from a storage facility to a waiting shuttle, its operator clearly fatigued, moving with the mechanical precision of someone who has performed the same task for too many consecutive hours. I waited until he returned to the storage facility, then moved quickly across the open ground between my position and the parked lifter. Every sense strained for signs of detection, every muscle tensed for immediate response if challenged. But I reached the vehicle without incident, concealing myself in the operator's compartment, wedged uncomfortably behind the seating area. When the worker returned, he performed only the most cursory check of the controls before resuming his route. The lifter hummed to life, moving ponderously toward the shuttle landing pad. I remained perfectly still, controlling my breathing, willing myself to become part of the machinery around me. The worker's attention was focused entirely on his task, his exhaustion a shield for my presence. The lifter reached the shuttle, where another worker directed the unloading of cargo containers. I watched through a narrow gap as the containers were secured in the shuttle's hold, calculating my moment. As the final container was positioned, the workers conferred briefly, then moved away to process the manifest data. The shuttle's cargo hold remained open, its interior shadowed and momentarily unwatched. I moved with the fluid speed that was my cast's birthright, crossing from the lifter to the shuttle in 3 long strides, pulling myself into the dark recesses of the cargo hold before the workers turned back. Heart pounding, I wedged myself between 2 secured containers, concealed from casual inspection, but with a clear line of sight to the hold entrance. Minutes stretched into an hour as final preparations were made. I heard the muffled voices of the shuttle crew performing pre-flight checks, felt the subtle vibrations as systems came online. Then the cargo bay doors sealed with a pneumatic hiss, plunging the hold into darkness broken only by faint status indicators on the secured containers. The shuttle launched with a surge of acceleration that pressed me back against the unyielding metal of the containers. We were ascending, breaking free of the planet's gravity well, moving toward the orbiting fleet. I had escaped the immediate hunt, but my situation remained desperate. Detection aboard the shuttle would mean instant capture, with nowhere to flee in the confined space of a vessel. The journey to the fleet was brief, the shuttle designed for rapid transport between surface and orbit. I felt the shift in propulsion as we approached the docking bay of a larger vessel, the deceleration as automated systems guided us into position, the subtle shudder as docking clamps engaged. New voices now, the shuttle crew coordinating with docking bay personnel. Cargo would be unloaded, inspected, distributed. My window of opportunity would be measured in moments, the difference between discovery and continuation of my desperate flight. The cargo bay doors opened, revealing the cavernous interior of what appeared to be a supply vessel, larger than a combat ship, designed for logistics rather than warfare. It offered more places to hide, more systems to exploit. I watched as workers began methodically unloading containers, checking manifest details against cargo markers. I waited until their attention was focused on a container at the far end of the bay, then slipped from my hiding place, moving silently along the shadows of the docking framework. A service corridor opened off the main bay, likely connecting to maintenance areas throughout the vessel. I entered without hesitation, putting distance between myself and the point of my arrival. The corridor led deeper into the ship, branching into a network of maintenance tunnels, access shafts, and secondary passages designed for technical crews rather than regular personnel. I oriented myself using the subtle cues of shipboard design, the standardized patterns that all Tau vessels followed. Central areas would be heavily trafficked, secured, monitored. Peripheral systems, especially waste management and environmental control, would be largely automated, minimally supervised. I made my way to a water reclamation subsection, a humid, cramped space filled with purification equipment and storage tanks. The constant hum of machinery would mask any sounds I made, while the unpleasant environment ensured infrequent visits from crew members. I found a maintenance access panel behind a row of filters, creating a space just large enough for me to rest, hidden from casual inspection. For the first time since my escape, I allowed myself to truly process what had happened, what I had discovered. The empire I had served loyally, had killed for, had believed in with absolute conviction, was built on biological control rather than philosophical truth. The greater good was not a choice but a compulsion, a biochemical leash that bound all Tau to the will of the ethereals, and I was now immune, or at least resistant. Something in my neurophysiology had changed, allowing me to see the control mechanisms for what they were. The neural degradation Mayan had diagnosed was actually neural freedom, the ability to think and question independently of ethereal influence. I accessed the data I had downloaded, reviewing it more carefully now that immediate survival was temporarily secured. The medical files were fragmented, incomplete, but they outlined a pattern of aberrant neurochemical responses in certain Firecast members, particularly those with extensive combat experience against specific enemy forces. The Imperium of Man was mentioned repeatedly, suggesting that exposure to human thought patterns, perhaps even to their religious fervor, might somehow disrupt the ethereal control mechanisms. The human child's pendant suddenly took on new significance. Not just a trinket or a superstitious gesture, but perhaps the catalyst for my awakening. Had proximity to human faith somehow altered my neurochemistry? The idea seemed absurd, yet the evidence before me suggested some correlation, if not causation. More disturbing were the files detailing the treatment protocols for affected individuals. Not gentle medical intervention, but aggressive neurological reprogramming. Gene therapy to enhance receptivity to ethereal pheromones. Selective memory erasure to remove contradictory experiences. And for those deemed irreversibly degraded, euthanasia disguised as honorable reassignment to specialized research facilities. I would not have survived the treatment with my identity intact. Whatever emerged would have worn my face, carried my name, but would have been a hollow shell, an empty vessel refilled with absolute compliance. The knowledge left me cold, adrift in a universe suddenly stripped of meaning. Everything I had believed, had fought for, had been prepared to die for, was a carefully constructed lie. Not just a political deception or a social control mechanism, but a fundamental biological enslavement of my entire species. What remained for me now? I could not return to the Empire, could not resume my place in a society I now saw as a vast prison. Yet I had nowhere else to go, no allies, no resources beyond my own skills and determination. I was alone in a way no Tau was ever meant to be, cut off from the collective purpose that defined our existence. The ship's systems hummed around me, a mechanical heartbeat marking the passage of time as I considered impossible options. Could I somehow reach other Tau, share what I had discovered? Would they even be capable of understanding, their minds still bound by biochemical chains? Could the truth set them free, or would it simply mark me as a dangerous aberration to be eliminated? My thoughts were interrupted by a change in the ship's operational sounds. The steady background hum shifted pitch, propulsion systems engaging with increased power. We were moving, accelerating away from orbital position. I needed to know our destination, to understand the context of my unwitting passage. I carefully exited my hiding place, moving through the maintenance corridors toward an information access point. Every vessel contained terminals for technical crews to monitor systems and access basic navigational data. I found one in an environmental control substation, thankfully unoccupied at present. The display confirmed what the engine sounds had suggested. We had broken orbit and were now on an outbound vector, accelerating toward the system's Mandeville point. This was not a routine supply run between planet and orbital fleet. We were preparing for warp transit, leaving the Corvessa system entirely. I accessed the mission parameters using the security codes I had taken from the guard. Our destination was a Tau research outpost designated Exploration Sphere 9-12, located in a previously unmapped star system several warp jumps distant from Corvessa. The manifest listed scientific equipment, specialized materials, and biological research specimens. A chill ran through me at that final item. What kind of biological research required transport to a remote outpost, far from the main expansion sphere? Given what I now knew about the Empire's methods, about the true nature of ethereal control, I suspected nothing benevolent. I delved deeper, searching for additional information about the outpost and its purpose. Most data was classified beyond my access level, but I found references to pheromone synthesis and neurological compliance enhancement. They were developing new control mechanisms, more powerful versions of the biochemical bonds that already enslaved our species. This vessel was not merely a supply ship. It was delivering materials for the next stage of Tau enslavement, for tightening the invisible chains that bound us to the will of the ethereals. And I was now aboard, heading directly toward the source of that corruption. The irony might have been amusing if the stakes were not so grave. In fleeing one trap, I had placed myself squarely in the path of something potentially far worse, yet it also represented an opportunity. If I could reach this research outpost, perhaps I could find more complete information about the control mechanisms, perhaps even a way to disrupt them, to free others as I had been freed. A desperate plan began to form in my mind, not escape now, but deliberate infiltration. I would remain hidden during transit, then use the confusion of arrival and unloading to infiltrate the research facility. There I would gather whatever information I could about the biological control systems, the pheromone technologies, anything that might help me understand how to counter them. It was a plan born of desperation, with minimal chance of success and maximum risk. But what alternative remained? I could not return to ignorant servitude. I could not unsee the truth I had glimpsed. Forward was the only possible direction, whatever dangers it might hold. The journey to Exploration Sphere 9-12 took 17 days. According to the ship's chronometers I occasionally accessed during brief forays from my hiding place. 17 days of cramped concealment, of carefully timed movements to secure minimal sustenance from supply caches, of constant vigilance against discovery. My firecast physiology was adapted for periods of deprivation, for operating under extreme conditions, but by the time I felt the subtle shift as the ship dropped from warp space, I was weakened, exhausted, reduced to a shadow of my former capability. Yet my resolve had only strengthened during the isolation. Each day of solitary contemplation had burned away another layer of conditioning, another strand of the invisible web that had bound my mind. I remembered moments from my service history with new clarity, saw the patterns of manipulation and control that had shaped every aspect of my existence. The times when doubt had begun to form, only to be washed away in the presence of an ethereal. The unquestioning acceptance of orders that contradicted observable reality, the complete absence of true dissent within our supposedly enlightened society. All of it suddenly explicable, not as the product of superior culture or philosophy, but as symptoms of a species-wide biochemical enslavement. When the ship finally docked at the research outpost, I was ready. I had studied the vessel's layout, marked the rhythms of crew movements, identified the optimal moment for movement. As cargo began to be transferred, I slipped from my hiding place and merged with the controlled chaos of the unloading process. The research outpost was smaller than I had anticipated, clearly designed for specialized work rather than general operations. A central hub connected to 3 extended laboratory wings, the entire structure built into the surface of a small, airless moon orbiting a gas giant. Beyond the reinforced viewports, stars burned with unwavering clarity in the vacuum, no atmosphere to diffuse their light. I moved with purpose, adopting the brisk efficiency of support staff, keeping my face turned from direct observation. My fire warrior physique might draw attention in a facility likely staffed primarily by earth and water caste personnel, but the universal deference shown to the fire caste worked in my favor. No one challenged my presence directly as I navigated the unfamiliar corridors. I needed access to the research data, to the core of whatever work was being conducted here. The central hub seemed the most logical location for primary systems, for the coordination of research activities across the specialized wings. I made my way toward it, alert for security measures beyond the standard protocols. The hub was a circular chamber dominated by a holographic projection system, currently displaying what appeared to be molecular structures rotating slowly in the air. Workstations ringed the perimeter, most unmanned at present, their displays showing various data streams and analysis parameters. At the far side, a watercast administrator conferred with two earthcast researchers, their attention focused on a data tablet rather than their surroundings. I moved to an unoccupied workstation, positioning myself to appear absorbed in the display while maintaining awareness of the other occupants. The system requested identity verification for full access, but basic informational protocols were available to any staff member. I navigated to the project overview, seeking context for the research being conducted. The information confirmed my worst fears, while revealing horrors I had not imagined. Project designation: Pheromone Enhancement Initiative. Primary objective: strengthen neurological compliance mechanisms across all non-ethereal castes. Secondary objective: develop delivery systems for newly contacted species to accelerate integration into the greater good. They were not merely maintaining the existing control systems, but actively strengthening them, developing more powerful biochemical bonds to ensure absolute obedience. And more, they were weaponizing these systems for use against other species, creating what amounted to a form of chemical warfare designed to replace independent thought with slavish devotion to the Empire. I continued scrolling through accessible data, absorbing the clinical descriptions of compliance testing on subjects from various castes, the dispassionate documentation of increased neurological response to enhanced pheromone compounds. There were references to resistant subjects being used for terminal phase testing, their neural patterns monitored as increasingly powerful compounds were administered until brain function ceased. They were killing Tau who showed resistance, using them as test subjects to calibrate the levels at which their control chemicals became lethal rather than merely compulsive. And they were doing it in the name of the greater good, justifying biological enslavement as necessary for collective harmony. My hands clenched involuntarily, a surge of rage temporarily overwhelming my tactical discipline. This was not the society I had fought to expand, not the future I had believed in. This was something monstrous wearing the face of enlightenment, using the language of unity to mask absolute domination. You appear distressed, Firecast. The voice came from directly behind me, calm and measured. I controlled my instinctive reaction to strike, to eliminate the threat, instead turning with deliberate slowness to face the speaker. An ethereal, smaller and older than Aunel Town Kaz, his skin a paler blue, his movements more measured, but unmistakably of the ruling caste, the biochemical masters of our species. He studied me with those large, knowing eyes, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Your presence here is unexpected, he continued, his voice melodic, soothing. Firecast rarely visit research installations without specific escort. Assignments. I felt it immediately. The familiar wave of calm trying to wash over my mind, the compulsion to defer, to submit, to accept without question. But now, aware of its source, I could resist. Not completely, not without visible effort, but enough to maintain my own thoughts beneath the chemical assault on my will. I was assigned to the supply vessel, I said, the partial truth easier to maintain than a complete fabrication. I was curious about our mission parameters. The ethereal's eyes narrowed slightly, his head tilting as he studied me more intently. Curiosity is an earth-caste trait, not typically found in fire warriors. He moved closer, and the biochemical pressure on my mind increased, a tightening band of artificial serenity trying to smother independent thought. "What is your designation, Firecaste?" I could not risk providing my real identity, not when I was certainly listed as a fugitive by now. "Shazla Viorla Kaitan," I said, claiming the rank of a common soldier rather than my earned position as a team leader. "You wear no sept markings," the ethereal observed, circling me slowly. The pressure on my mind continued to build, making it increasingly difficult to maintain the deception, to resist the instinctive urge to kneel, to submit, to confess everything. "They were damaged during loading operations," I managed, fighting to keep my voice steady, my posture controlled. "I was instructed to requisition replacements upon arrival." The ethereal made a small gesture, an elegant flick of long fingers. "Of course. How unfortunate." He stopped directly before me, close enough that I could detect the subtle scent emanating from him, the biochemical control mechanism now identified and understood. "You should report to the medical facility, Shazla. You appear unwell." It was not a suggestion. It was a command, delivered with the absolute expectation of obedience. Every instinct bred and conditioned into me for generations screamed to comply, to follow without question, to surrender to the will of this being who embodied the greater good. I almost did. The pressure was overwhelming, a weight pressing against every corner of my mind. But some core of resistance remained, a small, hard center of self that refused to be subsumed. The human pendant flashed in my memory, a symbol of defiance against forces that claimed absolute authority. Faith shields the soul when armor fails. "I will report immediately." "Honored ethereal," I said, lowering my eyes in a show of deference while my mind raced through escape options, survival scenarios. "I will accompany you," he said, that same gentle smile never leaving his face. "Your welfare is of concern to me." He knew, perhaps not the specifics of who I was or how I had come to be here, but he recognized the resistance in me, the failure of his biochemical control to produce complete compliance. I was already categorized as a threat, a resistant subject to be contained, studied, and ultimately eliminated. We walked together through the curved corridors of the research station, the ethereal maintaining a conversational tone, as if we were colleagues rather than captor and captive. He spoke of the work being done here, the advancements being made in social cohesion technologies, his euphemisms for the biochemical chains being forged around the minds of my species. "The greater good requires unity of purpose," he explained, his voice reasonable, paternal. "Individual divergence creates inefficiency, conflict, suffering. We eliminate that suffering by aligning all minds to a single harmonious path." "Without choice," I said, the words escaping before I could contain them. "Without freedom." He showed no anger at my comment, only a sad, indulgent smile. "Freedom is an illusion, Firecaste, a concept that exists only in opposition to natural order. In the wild, does the prey animal consider its freedom as the predator's jaws close around its throat? Does the planet consider its freedom as it is bound to orbit its star? All existence is constraint, boundary, limitation. We have simply perfected the most benevolent form of natural order. We had reached a sealed doorway marked with medical symbols and warning indicators. The ethereal placed his palm against the scanner, and the doors slid open to reveal a clinical space filled with advanced medical equipment. Unlike traditional healing facilities, this room contained restraint systems attached to diagnostic platforms, neural monitoring arrays, and injection mechanisms connected to sealed containment units. Not a place of healing, a place of biochemical reconditioning or termination. "Please enter," the ethereal said, gesturing toward the central platform. Our specialists will attend to your discomfort. There was no possibility of maintaining the deception further. No scenario where I submitted to those restraints and emerged with my mind intact. If I was to survive, to maintain the freedom of thought I had so painfully achieved, I had to act now, regardless of consequence. I struck without warning, a precise blow to the nerve center at the base of the ethereal's throat, a killing technique taught to fire caste warriors but never to be used against the revered masters of our society. His eyes widened in shock, in disbelief that a Tau would commit such ultimate heresy, such unthinkable violence against an ethereal. He crumpled to the floor, not dead but incapacitated, unable to speak or command. The biochemical cloud that had pressed against my mind dissipated as his consciousness faded, leaving my thoughts clear, focused, deadly in their precision. Alarms would sound soon. An ethereal's life signs were undoubtedly monitored at all times, any irregularity triggering immediate response. I had minutes, perhaps only seconds, before security forces converged on this location. I dragged the unconscious ethereal into the medical chamber, sealing the door behind us. His body was light, frailer than the robust physiology of the fire caste, another sign of the specialization that had shaped our species into distinct biological functions. The medical equipment provided what I needed: restraints to secure the ethereal to the diagnostic platform, neural monitors to confirm he still lived, his brain still functioned, and, most importantly, surgical tools designed for precision work on neurological systems. What I planned was monstrous by any standard of Tau society. Unforgivable. The ultimate violation of everything I had been taught to revere, yet necessary if the truth was ever to be known, if freedom was ever to be more than an illusion dismissed by our biochemical masters. The ethereal began to regain consciousness as I prepared the equipment, his large eyes blinking in confusion, then widening in horror as he realized his situation. He tried to speak, but the nerve strike had temporarily paralyzed his vocal apparatus, silencing the melodic voice that carried such compulsive power. "I am Shasui Tavar," I told him, my voice clinically detached as I calibrated the surgical array. Once a loyal servant of the Empire, now a fugitive from the lies you call the greater good. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by what might have been fear, an ethereal, afraid of a mere fire warrior. How alien that concept would have seemed mere weeks ago. "Your kind has enslaved us through biochemical means for generations," I continued, positioning the surgical instruments. "Pheromone control, neurological conditioning, genetic manipulation. You built an empire not on philosophical truth, but on biological compulsion." His head moved in weak denial, but the restraints prevented any significant resistance. The surgical array hummed as it completed its calibration sequence, scanning his unique physiology, mapping the specialized glands that produced the control pheromones. "I am going to extract those glands," I told him, watching the horror grow in his eyes. "Not to kill you, but to free you, to make you like the rest of us, equal, dependent on reason rather than biochemical dominance." It was a violation beyond measure in our society. To touch an ethereal without permission was taboo, to harm one, unthinkable. To surgically alter one, removing the very biological components that defined their caste, their place in society. There was no word for such an action, no concept in Tau culture for this level of transgression. Yet as the surgical array began its precise work, guided by my input, but operating with a precision no manual procedure could match, I felt no remorse, only a cold certainty that this was necessary. That truth, however terrible, was preferable to the most benevolent lie. The procedure was swift, the specialized equipment designed for neurological modification, extracting the pheromone-producing glands with minimal damage to surrounding tissue. I collected the biological material in a sealed container, tangible evidence of the biochemical control mechanism that had shaped Tau society since its earliest records. As the surgical array sealed the incisions, the ethereal remained conscious, his eyes never leaving mine. There was hatred there now, raw and personal in a way I had never seen in one of his caste. They always maintained an air of detached benevolence, of transcendent compassion. But with his biochemical authority literally extracted, what remained was simply a person, angry, afraid, violated. Equal. "You have destroyed yourself," he said, his voice hoarse but functional as the paralysis began to fade. "Even if you escape this facility, even if you live for 1,000 years, there is nowhere in the galaxy you can hide from what you have done here." "I know," I replied, securing the container with its damning evidence. "But perhaps others will see the truth because of this. Perhaps someday our species will choose the greater good rather than having it biochemically imposed." The alarms began then, shrill and insistent, security systems finally recognizing the ethereal's compromised condition, triggering station-wide alert. My time had run out. I took a final look at the diminished figure secured to the diagnostic platform, this being who had commanded absolute devotion through biological coercion rather than earned loyalty. There was nothing more to say, nothing that could bridge the gulf between what I had been and what I had become. I turned away, moving toward the sealed door, calculating routes through the station, paths to potential escape craft. The odds were minimal, the likelihood of survival approaching zero. But I had the evidence now. The physical proof of what I had discovered. If I could reach others somehow, if I could break through their conditioning long enough to show them the truth. "It will change nothing," the ethereal called after me, his voice stronger now, fueled by anger and humiliation. "Our way is still superior. Order is still preferable to chaos. Unity still stronger than division. Even without the pheromone bond, the logic of the greater good remains irrefutable." I paused at the door, looking back one final time. Perhaps, but now it would be a choice, not a compulsion, and that makes all the difference. I stepped through the door into chaos, into the final phase of my rebellion against everything I had once believed. Whether I survived to spread the truth or died in this sterile research station, I was free, truly free for the first time in my existence. The neural gland that had made me susceptible to ethereal control was still present in my body, but my mind had somehow developed resistance, immunity to the biochemical chains that bound the rest of my species. As I moved through the station, evading security teams, fighting when necessary, always moving toward the docking bays and the possibility of escape, I understood that I had become something unprecedented. Not merely a renegade, a criminal, a traitor to the Empire, but the first truly free Tau in countless generations. The first to see the bars of our invisible prison and choose to walk a different path. The humans had a concept their child had tried to share with me. Faith shields the soul when armor fails. Perhaps that was what I had found, not in their emperor or their religion, but in the simple act of questioning, of doubting, of refusing blind obedience. A faith, not in external authority, but in the right to choose one's own path, to determine one's own truth. Whatever awaited me beyond this moment, whatever slim chance of survival remained, I moved toward it without regret. The greater good might yet be a worthy philosophy, might yet represent the best path forward for my species and others, but it would have meaning only when freely chosen, never when biochemically imposed. I, Shazui Tavar, once a loyal son of the Empire, had become its greatest heretic, not through rejection of its ideals, but through insistence that they be realized honestly, without the hidden chains of biological control. A small rebellion, perhaps meaningless in the vast expanse of the galaxy and its endless wars, but for me, it was everything. The difference between existence and living, between serving and choosing, between slavery and freedom. The final door stood before me. Beyond it, the docking bay and whatever fate awaited. I stepped forward, into uncertainty, into possibility, into freedom.